we introduced ourselves, myself from Connecticut River Conservancy, and then Katie from the Nature Conservancy. I've been working on this for years, as have many of you. So we all know about the ecological impact of dams, hydro or not, slowing down water, heating up water, reducing dissolved oxygen, etc. FERC, the last time licenses were issued for these projects was in 1979, and we expect that this license will be 30 to 50 years. We don't know if it'll be 30, 40, or 50, but it's a long time to sort of make some hard and fast rules about how the facilities are gonna function. So the FERC, because FERC is a federal process, there are many other federal processes that are supposed to be kind of equally considered in this process. Many of you know this, but I'm just providing the background for the folks who may not, right? So FERC is supposed to consider the Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act, considerations of recreation. The states have a role in the state water quality certification process. And so all of these are supposed to be held on par essentially with the need for electric and energy generation. And so what you hope for is a balanced license that considers all of those options. The facilities that are being bundled together going through this relicensing are the Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon dams owned by Great River Hydro, and then the Northfield Mountain Pump Station and the Turners Falls Dam owned by First Light in Massachusetts. So we're obviously just focusing on the Vermont, New Hampshire, the Great River Hydro facilities at this talk, but we can fill you in on the First Light projects too if you are interested for any reason. So Great River Hydro is an LLC that's owned by ArcLight Power, which is an investment company out of Boston. When in about 2018, these facilities, the 15 Mile Falls facilities and the facilities on the Deerfield River were sold from TransCanada to ArcLight, and they set up Great River Hydro as kind of the holding company for these Vermont and New Hampshire based facilities. And, I put this slide in just to be clear that this is an investment company, and the bottom line here is a question of how much profit from these hydro facilities will stay in our communities and support the river, and how much will leave. For the past 40 years, many of you know, the facilities have been hydro peaking, meaning they are holding the water behind the dam much of the day. The surface water elevation behind the dam and the pool would increase, and then they would start to generate around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and start to send that water through at often high rates, and that pool level would decrease behind the dam. And so behind all 3 dams, there was generally a 2 to 3 foot surface water elevation fluctuation daily, sometimes twice a day. And on the other side, the change in the flow of water would go sometimes, for Wilder, the low flow was, the minimum flow was 800 CFS. And so if they were moving to generate in a period of 10 to 15 to 30 minutes, they might move from 800 CFS up to 8,000 CFS, or, their peak there is around 11,000. So it's pretty extreme changes in how the water is moving through the system. This graph you're looking at here, the blue line, it's 3 different areas in the Bellows Falls impoundment in the summer of 2014. The blue line is showing the surface water elevation fluctuations at the furthest northern end of the impoundment. And then the green and the red line at the bottom, you can see is a lesser fluctuation closer to the dam. This is here just to illustrate and remind everyone how the facilities have been functioning over the past 40 years.
Sorry, that was elevation, right? Not flow.
Yeah, that was surface water elevation.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. And how far upstream is the upper measurement?
I don't remember.
At the top of the reservoir, that's
Yeah.
the peaking coming down from Wilder, so causing the greater fluctuation.
Okay,
Yeah, so-
it's not just the buildup of the water itself, but it's the release from the Wilder Dam as well.
Yes.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so I think that transect was probably, I think it's about 18 miles south of the Wilder Dam is what's considered the top of the Bellows Falls impoundment in there. All right, Katie, you take it from here.
So little history for those who refresh for those who are around then, and just a reminder for those who maybe weren't. We started the relicensing back in October 2012. It's shortly after I got to the Nature Conservancy. In the beginning, we do scoping, we think about what studies we want and spend some years studying. And there were several delays along the way. Vermont Yankee closed, there were a couple of government shutdowns in there. There were some studies that had to be redone. So what is supposed to take 2 years took much longer. And a year ago, the Aquatic Resource Working Group, so Kathy, myself, state agencies, and Fish and Wildlife Service got together to think through some ideas about what flexible operations might look like. It's something that the power company had been saying that was really important to them. We pitched these ideas to Great River, and then they asked us to engage in some conversations, and that started in June and went through till November. And so at these meetings, one of the first things that one of the first things we wanted to make sure we understood was what our specific concerns were. In any negotiation or any kind of discussion, you want to make sure you understand what everybody's values are before you start. And this was the Aquatic Resource Group, so we were really thinking about fish spawning success and movement, aquatic habitat availability and persistence. These are specific components of the ecosystem that we thought from the data we could justify that they were being impacted by operations. So, and then specifically riverine fish species, and then cobblestone tiger beetle, riparian species, and dwarf ledge mussel, which is federally listed. And then on the company side, they're interested in the economic viability of their project, making sure that they're compliant with the energy regulator, and then this critical idea about operational flexibility. So that's kind of where we started. So just to say, this was not a comprehensive discussion. We weren't focused on other important issues like recreation and fish passage, which are both things, well, in erosion and cultural resources, these are all things that are of concern to many people at the table, but we were specifically focused on aquatic habitat and aquatic resources. And Kathy will talk a little bit in a minute about how CRC is thinking about those issues. So as some of you might know, Nature Conservancy partnered with UMass and USGS to develop some models for us to understand how the river was functioning. This is some output of that over 9 modeled years. This is just a model of how Wilder is currently operating. And we had this, and we also had some models of what a natural flow regime would look like. So very different. This is what the river would look like if there were no dams. So much less peaking. You know, you could see the up and down peaking in the previous graph, and a much more steady flow with longer low flows and periodic high flows. And these are depicting July to October months, so not the full calendar year. And then we also wanted to look at, okay, what would be the best case scenario, hydrologically speaking? So, okay, we're not going back to natural, but what would the system look like if there were no peaking out of these projects? And this is what we would call inflows outflows. So this still captures the upstream peaking of 15 Mile Falls, which is not within the scope of this relicensing. And so this was kind of our hydrological target, if you will. So, so some of the outcomes of our discussion, one thing that we were really pleased about is we did get Great River Hydro to agree to have base operations that looked like that hydrograph that I just showed you, which would have been the best case scenario. So base operations are inflow equals outflow. There's also, if you remember the graph that Kathy showed, we also got them to agree to a 1 foot bandwidth water surface elevation at the dam. So to prevent very high fluctuations. So in terms of flexibility, base operations are inflow equals outflow, but to meet the energy needs of the New England grid, the company will be allowed to basically operate as they choose for a certain number of hours every month. More in the winter when prices are more variable and the ecological system is a little bit less needy in terms of spawning and recruitment and growth, and then fewer hours in those more critical months for the species that we were looking at. And then also, you know, the water comes up really quickly and down really quickly, and that's also of concern. So we had got them to agree to do more gradual ramping of their peaks when they do peak, in most cases, except when they're called on by ISO to come on quickly. And then we also wanted to make sure that the impoundment wasn't down for too long. When they peak, they release water out of the impoundment, so there is a dip. Remember 1 foot bandwidth, we wanted to make sure that it came back up in a reasonable amount of time. So this is a graph, I'll walk you through this. This is a graph that demonstrates, it's a simulation of what these new operations should look like. So the red band on the bottom, that's current operations. This is at Wilder, and this is a winter example. So in this case, this would be the higher number of flexible hours. The red is current on the bottom, so that's hours in February, and that's discharge, so flow, cubic feet per second. And then the green dotted line is that inflow equals outflow. So no peaking, just releasing from the dam what's coming into the reservoir. And then the purple is the flexible operation. So it tracks that green dotted line until they have a flexible hour when they peak. So there's a few things that we liked about this. And again, this is kind of the worst case scenario out of the example, because this is the most number of hours in the year in winter, is the much higher base flows. So we feel that'd be much more protective of the resources in the river, and then much fewer peaks, which are typically pretty disturbing to habitat and to species in the river. And on the top of the graph, that's the impoundment level. So that's water surface elevation. So the bottom line is what we see today in the Wilder impoundment, the fluctuations up and down, going pretty low and often. And then the top is that stabilized water surface elevation, which is what we were looking for. So much smaller dips, much less frequent. And again, this is kind of the worst case scenario. So we'll show you another graph from the summer when there's 20 hours. Let's see, just a second. Okay, this is August. So 20 hours in the summer. This is a wet August. So normally we saw a bunch of different data. This is a wet summer. We did see some dry summers too. And you'll see that again, like it tracks the flexible operations, the purple line tracks that dotted green line pretty closely. Much fewer peaks. Most of the peaks are remnants from what's coming downstream, but they're small and gradual, and just a few peaks out of Wilder. And then at the top, a much more stabilized reservoir, which we were pretty pleased about when we saw that. And so just a summary of what we kind of take home from this, we really feel that this will improve flows that will benefit the ecosystem. So again, inflow equals outflow, stabilized reservoir, higher base flows, fewer fluctuations, and reduced rates of change. Also, so this in general, we're going to have more protection of shoreline habitat, shoreline and riparian habitat. We're thinking that this may decrease erosion issues in the impoundments on upstream properties and shorelands. And then we're also, from the data, there's going to be a much more higher and increased availability and persistence of habitat for the critters that we were concerned about. in terms of the power company, they're able to maintain their ability to support and respond to regional energy needs. And they have the flexibility that they need to be responsive to energy markets. So again, this was not comprehensive. We were primarily focused on aquatic resources. And so Kathy's gonna talk a little bit about what CRC is thinking in terms of these additional important concerns.
Right. So as we said, the conversation was limited to the aquatic impacts and the operational scenario. And then Great River Hydro was required to submit their final revised amended application in December. And so we weren't sure what they were going to put in for the additional protection, mitigation, and enhancement measures. And as soon as we got that application, I started pouring through it, looking for the other things they would provide, and found little to nothing, basically. This is what they put in the application. They, for recreation, the mitigation would be maintaining 3 primitive campsites that are part of the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, which they already maintain. So really no net gain in recreational support there. They agreed to continue to operate the fish ladders, and they added essentially a month at the beginning of the season to help support some of the resident species actually migrate a little bit in the river when they spawn. So it's to help allow those species to move through when they're spawning. And then they promised in the application to continue to discuss additional fish passage requirements with the resource agencies, which we believe they are hopefully doing now. And they plan to develop and sign a programmatic agreement for managing historic resources. From our perspective, going on the 10th year of this relicensing, after 33 studies were done, the details of fish passage and the historic preservation and consideration of traditional cultural properties, there should have been something put forward in this application, some level of detail as to what they're planning to do to support the resource for the next, 50 years. So CRC and the Appalachian Mountain Club in 2018, surveyed a bunch of the towns. The Great River Hydro had to do a recreation study. And so we compiled additional information and submitted that to FERC with essentially like what we think would be reasonable recommendations for the company to take up under this license. None of these were included, but these were some of the things that we thought should be included, right? Like some really actually good, well-made ADA compliant access areas, improvements to the portages, funding of the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, and marketing the river, supporting the recreational economy and the river valley, improving the fish viewing facilities, et cetera. So these are things that the company could do and that we are advocating that they put forward in their application somehow in the next couple of months while we're getting into the end of the thing here, the end of our timeline. Additionally, better effective fish passage. The fish ladders were built for Atlantic salmon, and the species of concern now, American eel, shad, and sea lamprey, have different triggers and needs to help them move up and downstream. And there was mortality found for the downstream passage for some of these species. So things need to be put in place to help their safety as they move through. And again, we think that the reduction in the surface water elevation changes should reduce some of the erosional impacts. Obviously, rivers erode, but we expect there to be a change in what we see in terms of the eroding banks. And additionally, because we're moving from a situation that has essentially had held stagnant water and then moved it through quickly to a situation where the river would be running most of the time, we expect that there will be changes in how the sediment moves in the mouths of the tributaries over the next, decade, 20 years. Like, we will see shifts in the river. And so we really feel that Great River Hydro should support scientific monitoring and analysis of what's happening, and then pay for, if we find that we still are having, you know, serious erosion issues along the stream banks, pay for bank stabilization if needed and things like that. So there's actually a really kind of a great opportunity for, you know, scientific research to see what happens geomorphologically in a river of this size with this kind of change. And so we're hoping and encouraging Great River Hydro to help support that research through UVM and UNH or other partners. And so we're presenting to as many groups as we can and as many towns as we can, because there will be a public comment period coming up later this summer. Right now, you know, Great River Hydro had to submit the application in December. FERC has requested additional information. And our understanding is that there will be a point when FERC deems the application complete, which we expect to be, excuse me, probably after June. And at that point, there will be a formal comment period for the public to comment on the application. And so we're trying to help people get re-engaged, understand the details, to be ready to comment when that opportunity arises. Subsequent to that, next year, the companies will also have to apply to both states for a water quality certification, and there will be a public comment period then as well. So, you know, we're just really encouraging the subcommittees and towns to be ready to comment and really think about, you know, what you would request or ask FERC to support in this new license. And so we'll leave it there. I'll stop sharing, and then hopefully we have a few minutes to answer questions. Anyone?
Great. Comments, questions?
I have 2 questions, but I also want to thank Katie, because as a CRJC commissioner, I've been hearing about your modeling for a long time, and it's so great to see it pay off in such a big way. Really appreciate your work on that.
Thank you for that. It has been a long time.
But I mean, as was pointed out, the process is 9 years in or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it was a big surprise, you know, to me, and I think to the other commissioners, because this seems such a big step forward. So one question I had in the proposed operating system, even though they're not flood control dams, they have managed levels to accommodate floodwaters. Is that still part of the plan?
Yes, we made sure that it was included. So that happens when the water gets above a certain point. So yes, so what we outlined there is for regular operations, but when it gets over a certain point, they will have their flood control operations to protect the uplands from flooding, basically.
Because I know some of the upstream farmers have had issues where they, I think, had a better relationship with TransCanada on some of it, and when they got the water out of the field so they could plant, and we've been hearing that they're having more problems now. So,
well, it was a very wet, I think it was a very wet earlier part of it, or no, I don't know. That is interesting why they would have more trouble this year. Maybe they were trying something out. I don't know.
It was in a couple years ago, I heard that Great River Hydro wasn't as helpful to them about when they got the water off the field. So
yeah. I think it's the same people that are running, also operating those dams. So
yeah.
But it's definitely in there. That was something that we discussed early on. You know, when we asked Great River if they, like, what would happen if they went strict run of river, they're like, well, we can't go strict run of river because we need to, you know, implement these flood control operations. And then everybody was like, well, of course, let's just talk about, you know, outside of that, basically.
And then a related question, and this might kind of a stupid question maybe, but rivers are naturally low in the summer and fall. So are we saying that this one's not gonna be allowed to get low anymore? Is that, or will it be maintained at a lower level in the summer and fall than spring?
It'll be inflow equals outflow. So whatever is coming into the dam will leave the dam.
So what that means is, you know, if you think about, right, like the snow melt, the spring runoff, as the snow melts, you have all that stored water on the landscape, right? That water is entering the river, and you're going to have high water in April. That is going to maintain. But what happens is that high water gets moved through the system, through all the dams, right? It's not being held back or really controlled. And then similarly, once that spring runoff kind of moves out and you moved into the later summer and there's less and less rain, right? There's less and less volume of water in the landscape. And so the water levels will be lower. Whatever the water level is, it will be moved through the facilities, right? So you're still going to have your natural hydrograph of kind of like the cycle of the year. But it's just
what I'm confused by is seeing on the graphs the water surface elevation being the same on the two that we saw, the winter and the summer.
That's the impoundment, not the river. So the impoundment stays the same because it's backed up behind the dam. I mean, it's a very narrow reservoir, so it looks like a river, but it is an impoundment.
Yeah.
So that, how long is it, Kathy? 46
miles.
behind Wilder is impoundment. So, and that's measured at the dam. So the further back you get from the dam, it's going to be more river-like. But we wanted steady state because that means that they're not jerking the impoundment around. So whatever's coming in leaves, like a bathtub.
Yeah, the bathtub is the easiest metaphor, right? So you can think of it right now. What's happening is they plug the bathtub, they fill it up, they open the plug and let the water run out, right? In this new scenario, the plug will be open, the faucet will be running, and that rate is the same. So you could still have a full bathtub that doesn't change,
Right.
but water is leaving and water is coming in at the same
So,
rate.
but you are saying it's going to be the same elevation at the dam in summer and spring.
They're not taking the dam out, Tara.
Yeah, I understand that.
I mean, we're not going back to
We
a
tried.
natural river under any circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not-
So this is Bill Bridge.
Phil, yes.
I have a question too. The river, it looks like the level is going to be pretty consistent, but it's going to also be consistently high. It looks like higher than, I mean, it's and so I think that a lot of the erosion that happens at my house is by motorboat wakes in the summertime on weekends, smashing against the shore, and you can see a moat of muddy water on both sides. It seems to me if they kept it lower, then it wouldn't smash against the banks, and it would be. I'm worried about keeping it high all the time when the motorboats are out there having a lot of erosion.
Yeah. So Bill, a couple things you got to think about with the motorboats is they're only there in the summer, so it's not a year-round event like the water fluctuation from the hydro.
They're mostly there only on weekends, actually. So,
right. So not even every day. I think you would still have what would end up happening with that wave action is whether the water's high or the water's low in terms of the elevation, you're still going to have that wave action.
But
it's
if it's lower, it hits the beaches. It doesn't hit it doesn't smash at the vertical banks. It hits the beaches.
Right, but the beaches
so it doesn't
become the vertical bank, right? So it's and
it's about the head. They keep it high so they can make. I mean, otherwise they don't get the same benefit power wise. So that's why.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, they have more head. They have more hydraulic head.
Right. So that was kind of one of the, all of the details, like many of these negotiating points were squabbled over. And so that was something that they were pretty adamant about because they wanted to have the hydraulic head. If they were going to move to run a river, they wanted to be able to have the hydraulic head.
So this group had a conversation a while ago about the lack of funding for enforcement of things like wake speed up here. That might be something that we could ask the applicant for.
Yeah.
Do you expect that the proposed operating rules or operating guidelines that you negotiated will be written into the permit?
They wrote it in their, they included it in their license application. So now it's up to FERC and commenters, I guess.
But I mean, as you presented, as your slides showed, that's the language that's in the license application?
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, you'll see in the application document, if you dig into it, there's like an amendment, which basically is the agreement that we came to, which defines, you know, we gave kind of a summary example. There's more detail in there. And since it's the preferred alternative put forth by the company, and then the stakeholders involved also signed off saying it was our preferred alternative as well. So yeah, I think that this operational change is going to do a lot to benefit the river. CRC just feels that the company should do more given the length of the license. And
so the other thing is that they state in the license application that they're able to maintain 98% of their annual revenue under this operation and 100% or close to it of their annual power generation, which is pretty amazing.
Jet, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was raising my physical hand in addition to my digital hand there.
Thank you.
Wanted to ask Kathy if you know, obviously, hi Kathy. Obviously, Great River wouldn't be agreeing to this if it didn't fall within their business model.
Chet, you just
Model plans.
I think you're breaking up, Jet.
Operating change.
all right, wait, Chet, it wouldn't agree to it unless it was in their business model, and then I lost the rest of your question.
I'm going to cut my video off in hopes that that helps. My question was, have they provided financial projections of the new operating agreement so that we might be able to quantify this new business model, so we can try to quantify what these mitigation costs might look like?
In the application, they have to provide an example. It's not like fully transparent. It's an example of the financial kind of impact. And so what they did is they took the 2016 revenue, and they compared what occurred under the peaking regime and what would happen with the revenue under this new operational scenario for all three facilities. And it's like a 1% impact on revenue. We were actually, when we went into this conversation with them, we were expecting it to be a much more of a financial impact, but as it turns out, they're fine. They're doing fine.
Which is a big deal, actually,
Yeah.
Huge deal.
because of, well, it's something that I'm really interested in on a broader scale because of the benefits, ecologically speaking. We shouldn't let hydropower off the hook. You know what I mean? If they can improve this much without changing their revenue.
And CRC previously got some grant funds to hire Synapse Energy Economics to try to do an analysis of what, using public information, what kind of money they were making annually. And it's very different depending on the year, because the energy prices can be quite drastically different year to year. But, you know, in general, the profit margin is, you know, a couple $1 million from what we could glean from public information, a couple $1 million for each facility a year. So they, you know, there is money there for them to be able to mitigate, you know, and support the resource. The other thing, and you know, they're a private company, so this financial information is not, you know, they don't have to share it. I did find it interesting, you know, many of you might have seen the article about the power purchase agreement between Green Mountain Power and Great River Hydro that starts in 2023. So they're in a different position now, because instead of really providing mostly peaking capacity energy, they are going to be providing electricity 24 hours a day. And that power purchase agreement, I don't think could have happened without this new operations scenario. So there may be even additional economic benefits that like we don't even know about, just because I don't understand the electricity market well enough to.
Ted was
Yeah.
going to ask a question, I think.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your very comprehensive list. That sounds, obviously you've thought very carefully about that, and I like a lot of those. Thank you. I have a question about whether the company has agreed to any of those sorts of things in their other relicensing activities.
So the 15 Mile Falls relicensing didn't end up going through a regulatory process. It went through a settlement. And a big part of what came out of that settlement was the Mitigation and Enhancement Fund that is now held by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation that can be used for restoration projects, north of the junction with the White River. So it's not, it's not a comparable example because the process they're going through is very different. And the Deerfield relicensing, and I came on board after that, so I don't know all of the details. There was a settlement agreement that came out of that one as well. And I think that they did have to do a recreation plan, which required them to do some enhancements of recreation facilities at the Deerfield. And it also required whitewater releases. So yeah, I mean, the things we're asking for essentially are not, they're completely reasonable routine things that are often done in relicensing processes. And as an example, the portage, right now the portage around Bellows Falls is 1.5 miles. And so one alternative would be for Great River Hydro to provide a van service. If there's a through paddler, right, you could call, they would pick you up and move you to where you would put in, which is what is done by First Light just south of the border in Massachusetts, right? So they deal with their long portage by providing that service. So yeah, none of these are unreasonable requests at all.
What's the percentage difference between like the 15 Mile Falls percentage of revenue versus the projected percent of revenue towards mitigation for these three?
That's a hard question because the 15 Mile Falls projects are massive. They're much larger. So the amount of revenue that are made on those projects has to be much larger, but I don't know what kind of information was shared in that settlement discussion or how they got to the final number. And in that case, the final settlement amount that funded the Mitigation and Enhancement Fund was, I think, $18 million. So probably, I mean, based on it, my guess is it was really kind of a pittance based on like what they can earn at those facilities. But I really don't know.
I apologize for asking math questions late on a Monday. I'll stop doing that.
Any other questions for Kathy and Katie or comments?
I will just say, I will follow up with an email that Olivia probably has already, but there's a bunch of additional resources and I'll send you the links for those if you want to dig into more detail, a link to the application, etc. And we also, CRC is hosting a monthly, we're calling it a hydropower coffee hour to dig into particular details. So we just did one on traditional cultural properties. The next one is April 14th at 9:30 a.m., which will be focused on critters, so bugs and fish and different things and the impact. And this includes all 5 facilities, so also the Massachusetts facilities. And then May 12th, whatever that, I think it's the Wednesday. Yeah, May 12th at 9:30. Will be focused on recreation. So those are kind of more casual, like it's just an hour to talk, answer questions, just to have more opportunities for folks to get questions answered and be connected with the resources and things like that. I will also send, we updated our hydro webpage with some real details about FERC and how you comment and how you sign up for the docket for these facilities, I would suggest subscribing to the docket. Even if you go to like the Great River Hydro's website to look at the studies and look at their documents, you don't get to see what other people have submitted. So if you register for the FERC docket, you get to see anyone who comments, you see the comments, and it's very helpful, right? So both CRC and, for instance, American Whitewater commented at the end of January, pointing out deficiencies in the application. And so having access to those documents as well is, may be helpful as you think about commenting or what you would want to include in your comments.
Great, thanks, Kathy. All right. Anything else? Go ahead, please.
Sorry, and one last pitch is we are trying to maintain what we call our FERC email list, because we want to be able to update folks and make sure when the comment period opens and things like that. So if you want to be added to that list, just let me know.
All right, great.
Thanks for having us tonight.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the update.